Anyone been scrolling down on inkdecks.com, looking at all the tournament decks that have been coming in, looking at some of the deck lists and going, why on earth are they playing that card, but like nobody else is? Well, today I'm going to take a look at some of those decks that have those specific cards and break down to me why those cards are being played and deliver the information to you so you can better understand it. First and foremost, let's start with what is a tech card? Tech cards are a term that you might not hear too often, but as you get to higher level of competition, you start to kind of understand what they actually are. And the true and easy and simple meaning is tech cards are put in a deck to basically try to simplify a deficiency in a deck. So while we're going through this list of cards today, they're going to make your decks better and understanding why these players played them to success. Just think of these are key components in deck building that actually have the ability to just remove really problematic threats to your specific game plan. Well, let's get into them. So Kurt here was able to take this list to a 4th place finish at the DLC in Chicago. One of the fundamental cards that I think people aren't understanding why the card is specifically good is King Undisputed. This is a card that I was very high on during the reveal seasons for Ursula's return. What I can say for sure is that this may be a more deceiving card to many. However, most see it as kind of unwarranted, uninkable slots in the deck because it doesn't always answer the card you wanted to. Now, I was a player that was more of a Lady Tremaine greater than Madame Medusa for a very long time, so I have to really disagree with that sentiment. But it's honestly more than just that. My teammate Colby was very down on the card all throughout testing, but George and I were very adamant that it had a place. The key factor for it was the cards it specifically answers on curve while enabling us to a large board presence swing when we can sing the card with rabbit or goat. It actually makes the card even better. To put it as simple as possible, for anyone who understood the Amethyst Steel aggro or mid-range decks from Into the Inklands, the card is simply used to lock the board when you take your more aggressive lines in games. I compared it directly to And Then Along Came Zeus. When you were able to play Flynn into Sisu, into Rabbit on turn 4, now, instead of being only Maui on turn 5, you can sing with Rabbit to banish a character, then play a Queen's Castle and move a character to the castle, presenting so many threats to the table that it's near impossible for Sapphire decks to recover in time. Removing Hiram, Grandma Tala, Cogsworth, and more on turn 5 can cripple the Sapphire decks and really surefire give you a line of victory. The next decks we're looking at was played by Ben Fishman, a teammate of mine who finished in the top 64 with Sapphire Steel. Another list that on paper looks to be pretty straightforward, pretty understanding, not playing anything crazy, no dramatic changes for cards or the deck list. And then you look kind of sort of in the center there, and we find ourselves with 2 Avalanche. This card looks like a card that does a lot of stuff or nothing at all. However, it is a card that truly can punish certain lines of play. I believe the card would have been a solid one of to include in Steel list when it was just Hidden Cove for the moment. But now, with the Queen's Castle back in the fray and Ruby Amethyst on presence by everyone within the metagame, I think the card became more than just a singleton and very likely could be played in multiples. Against Emerald decks with Hidden Cove, this card simply crushes hopes and dreams. The one thing locations gave to certain strategies was the ability to continue to pressure the game while not developing any more characters in fear of board wipes like a Be Prepared or Grab Your Swords. Players taking off a turn to play a location and move to it can feel safe. Avalanche is the best counter to those lines and can really flip the script for any matchup. Just as I was saying about the King Undisputed line, very often in games now, you're going to see a player get to a point where they're comfortable in the game and say, okay, I don't need to add any more characters to the board. Let me change my line of thinking and add a threat. This is what Ruby Amethyst does so very well. This is what Emerald Steel is also looking to do, because Emerald Steel is looking to play Cove and then spread its characters into Cove for a cheap turn off to remove themselves from being answered by Grab Your Swords. However, when you can do that and they take a whole turn off, and then you play Avalanche and remove the Bucky and remove the Cove and trickle in some other damage, it can really turn the tide in games. Also, in a deck we're going to be talking about very shortly here, cards like Pride Lands are seeing play. There's other locations that might find their home back in the metagame where there's not a lot of answers or very good answers being played to locations. So because of that, Avalanche might honestly become more and more worthy of deck slots moving forward. This deck at first glance, if you weren't looking for anything out of the ordinary, might look pretty simple, pretty straightforward. However, there's a card just sitting there to the left, Great Stone Dragon. This card found its home into a third place finish at Chicago. It was also a card that has had high praise by many players in the community. Most don't understand its power. I believe it's actually misunderstood as a Fishbone Quill knockoff. I believe it should be portrayed as a magic mirror that's inkable. The ability to get more use out of cards in the discard pile is just a bonus, really, that effectively can make all characters Grandma Tala from Chapter 1. In the mirror match, this card can very well be the biggest flip to it. Always being able to set up 13 to 17 ink for large blowout turns is made much more simple when you utilize your discard pile over your hand. I think many misunderstood this card for being a very slow Fishbone Quill or a knockoff Heart of Tefiti. I really think that this card has a true spot in these deck lists if Ruby Sapphire remains to be one of the most played decks in the game. I think when you start trying to figure out how to win the mirrors and how being more efficient in mirrors, Great Stone Dragon ends up being a phenomenal card and option for that particular matchup. Zach Bivens took Amber Steel Songs to a top 32 finish at DLC Chicago. Again, this is another list that when you start looking at it and start breaking it down, you do see a lot of very interesting choices. However, in this particular metagame, a card that I think stands out the most is World's Greatest Criminal Mind. This card saw a ton of play on camera in Chicago thanks to Zach Bivens and his Amber Steel Songs. Inkable removal is incredibly hard to find within Disney Lorcana, but removal that can be played for free, I mean, that's just unprecedented. This card does one thing really well, and that is answering just about every threat in the Ruby Sapphire matchup. Tamatoa, Maleficent Dragon, Maui, and not one, but both Sisus most likely. But the best part about this card is the fact that when in doubt, you can simply just ink it. I do think this is one of the few songs that play a vital role in decks that want to commit to it. It was likely a key reason for Zach to finish as #1 seed in Chicago. I don't think you should go to the extent of ever playing support characters to turn it on. Just be happy to take out the characters you need to and drop it down in the inkwell as a resource when necessary. Emerald Steel was all up and down in the top 64 of the DLC in Chicago, but this particular list played a very interesting card that I think many have kind of written off at this point. Morph Space Goo, when he was revealed during spoiler season, I was very down on the character. I never thought he would find a home and be of use to many decks. Well, now we have so many good inkable Emerald cards, it's hard to believe there was a time we didn't have any. The card's biggest strength now lies within not being a priority target. Diablo and Ursula are far bigger fish to fry that the likelihood of Morph catching a Brawl or a Baboom or a Smash is so very low now. And even if that does happen, then your 3-drop bombs is all the more safe. Morph is opening up more ways to land earlier shift targets, creates an even bigger threat for Emerald Steel decks, and it may make the ability to play your more fair hands without Bucky or Diablo actually better and kind of diversify your play lines so very much that it might be even more difficult for opponents to play against you. Although this list did not pass a top 64, I believe Morph is a key factor moving forward for all Emerald Steel lists, and it's definitely a card that you should find a way to play in your decks and give a real chance again. I just think it has the ability to alter so many matchups and give the world of unpredictability for opponents to truly know how to play against you in a given game. Here we are looking at the top 16 deck list played by my teammate George. Yes, I know we've already seen a Ruby Amethyst deck, but this time we need to talk about the Amethyst tech card. And let's be honest. Ursul's Return did not have many good Amethyst cards whatsoever. But this card in specific has found its way into home for many different reasons. Chernabogs Followers. The landscape for one-cost characters have made a drastic change in identity. The need for the 1/3 Olaf or Always Classy minis is no more. The ability to draw cards upon questing or simply on your terms gives a ton of credence to this card now seeing a ton more play. So much so that George deciding he only wanted to play followers and nothing else because he was fearful of how the majority of one-cost characters get removed or simply don't affect the game enough to be worth playing in the Emerald Steel matchup. The followers acted as a perfect solution to the assumed Emerald Steel metagame, where every card is important. Being able to get 1 to 2 lore, then draw a card always felt good in almost every matchup, but truly excelled in the discard games to draw the card when you needed it, or force them into unfavorable trades, seeing as all their characters are important to stay on the board early. The worst thing that could happen was a Hidden Cove or a Shift Pegasus line, but even in those games, it means you're one turn closer to be prepared, which is exactly where you need to hit in that particular matchup. Those were the 6 key cards that I felt were really the most standout cards in the given decks from the top 64 of Chicago. But there were a few more that I really want to cover as kind of like honorable mentions. If you think you have an honorable mention or you think I missed something, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what card you felt was very good in your local games recently, at DLC Chicago, coming up for set championships. Let me know if you think you have a card that is better than the 6 cards that I just listed. But for now, here's 4 more honorable mentions. These are a few more honorable mentions that I believe do each have a true spot in a given deck list. Vital Spear, Hidden Cove, Maurice's Workshop, and Aerial Sonic Warrior. All of the cards on this list here have a true home in just about any deck that you want it to. Hidden Cove is probably the most popular, and it's gone from tech card to potentially core. However, there are still lists that maybe aren't playing it. There's also Emerald decks that might not be playing it. So while Emerald Steel is definitely committed to the card moving forward, I think that more Emerald decks should also learn from this and be more committed as well. Amber Emerald might want this card. Emerald Amethyst might also be able to utilize this card. I think the ability to protect your Diablo at all costs is very crucial, but also protecting other characters out of brawl range, out of smash range, out of Along Came Zeus or Medusa. I think Hidden Cove really does commit to these really weird lines that keep characters along for much longer. And in most cases, 6 willpower is enough to be even more annoying. Aside from Avalanche, there's not a great answer to this card for any of the decks ready to play against it. Maui is the one card that can interact with it as a 1-for-1 trade easily. Aside from that, you need multiple cards to interact. And even in a world where less and less Merlin Crabs are being played, Cove just has the ability to stick around and make the early game challenges or removal less relevant in games. Vital Spear is an interesting card that does find its home in a few decks in the top 64 for Ruby Sapphire list. Its ability to grant Rush and +2 strength definitely can help against problematic locations, but it also has the ability to alter the math and speed up the game in certain ways. Turning even your Grandma Tala into a 5 strength character with Rush when you play her definitely can catch players off guard. Being able to even give a high rim rush in some worlds if your opponent misplays their Bucky can definitely go a long way as well. I think Vital Spear, being a 1-cost inkable item, does not have a ton of drawback and feels like a card that should be a one of in most Ruby Sapphire item lists. Aerial Sonic Warrior might be the most questionable. What I can say for sure is this card was listed in the Emerald Steel deck we just showcased a little bit ago, but it was also highly touted about by multiple respectable players within Disney Lorcana. From different teams, different content creators, many players are on this character, and many teams brought this character in decks that they were playing that had steel in it. So I think that there's a good chance that Ariel has a role. I just think so far she's probably the most unproven of the 4 cards on this list. Maurice's Workshop adding just another layer of ways to draw cards can consistently give certain item decks even more consistency than they already have. I do think the 3 cost uninkable slot is the worst part about it. So if you can find a way to better create your deck with less inkables, then Maurice's Workshop might shine a little bit greater. I know for us in our games that we played and the deck that we were playing in Chicago, we were too heavy on uninkables already, utilizing those slots for different cards. So I think in a world that you do not want to play a whole new world and can consistently draw more cards through Maurice's Workshop to outdraw opponents in the mirror or red-blue matchups, or even outdraw the Emerald Seal discard, the Maurice's Workshop is a perfectly fine card for those lists. Hopefully those 10 cards were helpful for you, and maybe now you have a better understanding of why players are adding them to deck lists. To me, it's always fun to kind of go through these deck lists, find the card that sticks out the most, and then try and understand why it's there. I have to give a lot of credit to Team TFM helping me through the list, helping me kind of decide what we want it to be put on it, what I wanted to talk about. Also, a shout out to some of the players I spoke to, trying to understand, these cards as a whole. Scott was a real big help. My friend Colby, Ryan Miles that I spoke to leading up to a bunch about the event, about Maurice's Workshop and things like that, and even Zach Bivens kind of confirming my theory of why he played World's Greatest Criminal Mind over a couple other songs. So a huge shout out to everyone that helped me compile this list. I love doing content like this. If you like content like this, then first of all, hit the like button for me. Second, hit me up in the comments and let me know if you want more breakdowns like this and understanding these kind of intricate reasons for playing cards. I'd love to hear about it. And of course, if you haven't yet, let me know what your tech card of the week is, what your tech card of the month is, what you're thinking of. Hey, this might be the reason that I can win at set championships. I want to know all that and more in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching today. If you're interested in seeing more decks like the ones you saw today, check out the meta report from last week as I broke down the best decks in the room at DLC Chicago. For now, what's my favorite card? My favorite tech card? I guess you'll just have to wait till next video. See you guys.